She hadn't stood this long since the accident, and her whole body was trembling. Adam didn't push, just stayed close as her father's eyes filled with tears. One more step could change everything, or end it right there. The rain that morning was not the gentle kind that tapped playfully against glass and made you want to curl up with a book. It was heavy, almost oppressive, the kind that turned the air into a thick, gray curtain. The clouds sat low over the city, swallowing the tops of buildings in a dull haze. From the window of the hospital's east wing, the skyline looked muted, like someone had drained it of color. Emily Stanton's wheelchair moved down the corridor at a slow, measured pace, each squeak of the wheels sharp in the otherwise quiet hallway. Her hands rested limply on the armrests, not bothering to push faster. The movement was just enough to get her from one place to another, a mechanical necessity, not a choice. She kept her gaze fixed ahead, avoiding the sympathetic nods from passing nurses, and tried not to think about how much her life had changed in half a year. 6 months ago, she was center stage under the warm glow of stadium lights, her every movement a perfect expression of the music that carried her. At 18, she had been the youngest ballet prodigy to lead the New York Academy's Grand Winter Performance. People spoke her name with a kind of reverence. Then came the accident. She didn't need to replay it in detail to feel its echo. The flash of headlights cutting through rain, the squeal of tires too late to stop, the sickening jolt when metal and motion collided. She remembered the strange silence right after, not because the world had gone quiet, but because her own body had. Doctors later explained the truth in clipped, practiced phrases: severe spinal injury, no motor function in the legs, minimal chance of recovery. The kind of words that rearranged a person's future in seconds. But if she was honest, the physical loss wasn't the worst part. It was the loneliness. She smiled for visitors, accepted praise for being brave, but the moment the door closed, she would bury her face in her pillow and let the ache spill out in muffled sobs. Her father didn't know about the nights she stared at the ceiling until dawn, wondering if she would ever feel like herself again. She hid it from him because every time his eyes lingered on her, she saw something unbearable, a haunted helplessness that had never been there before. Charles Stanton was a man who built solutions out of thin air. As CEO of Stanton Global, he could fix problems with phone calls, contracts, and the kind of money that bent situations in his favor. But no amount of wealth could return her to the stage, and no authority could undo what the accident had taken. He had tried everything within his reach: the best neurologists, advanced rehabilitation programs, even experimental treatments abroad that raised more eyebrows than hope. When nothing worked, he converted an entire wing of the mansion into a private rehab center. It was immaculate, equipped with state-of-the-art machines, staffed by professionals whose resumes were longer than some people's life stories. But the weeks slipped by with no progress, and Emily withdrew further into herself, retreating into a silence that walls and windows couldn't keep out. It was then, after another therapy session ended with her refusing to speak, that Charles realized he couldn't keep doing the same thing. Money and machines weren't going to reach her. What she needed, if she could even be reached anymore, had to be something else entirely. So, with the kind of decisiveness that once closed billion-dollar deals, he made the call. They would leave the city. Not for another clinic, not for another specialist in a white coat. This time it would be somewhere quieter, far from the noise of traffic and the sterile smell of hospitals. A place where she could breathe air that hadn't passed through filters, where she could see something green instead of endless gray. He chose a retreat called Healing Storms, tucked high in the mountains, a private facility known for blending modern therapy with something less tangible, but perhaps more essential: emotional healing. Emily didn't argue when he told her. She didn't have the energy to protest, and maybe, somewhere deep down, she didn't care where she was taken. She just stared out the car window on the long drive out of the city, watching the skyline disappear behind them until it was nothing but a memory blurred by rain. The road to Healing Storms wound higher and higher into the mountains, trading the restless hum of city traffic for the quiet persistence of wind through pines. The rain had eased by the time they reached the final stretch, replaced by a pale, washed-out sky that seemed to make the air feel sharper in her lungs. Emily sat in her wheelchair, strapped into the modified SUV, watching the trees pass in blurred streaks of green and brown. The world felt bigger out here, but in a way that made her feel smaller, more fragile. When they pulled through the wooden gates of the retreat, the first thing she noticed was how different the air smelled. Cleaner, yes, but also colder, touched with something wild and unfamiliar. The facility was built from dark-stained timber and stone, its cabins scattered along winding paths lined with frost-tipped grass. In the distance, the peaks stood like silent watchers, their tops swallowed by low clouds. Charles had insisted on the best accommodations available, a spacious cabin with wide doorways, grab bars in all the right places, and a view of the valley. The staff greeted them warmly enough, with the kind of politeness that sounded practiced. Smiles were quick, movements efficient, voices calm. Emily could tell they were trained to be kind, but there was a distance in their eyes, the sort that came from seeing too many patients come and go. To them, she was another name on a clipboard, another morning checklist to complete before moving on to the next. Her daily routine began immediately. Meals at set times, light physical therapy sessions, and scheduled moments in the common areas where other patients gathered. She participated only as much as politeness required, speaking when directly addressed, offering nothing more. Between sessions, she found herself sitting outside her cabin, staring at the jagged line of treetops against the shifting sky. The silence here was different from the silence in the mansion, less suffocating, but still heavy. On the third day, as she sat alone with her thoughts, she heard the crunch of small footsteps on the gravel path. A boy, no older than 6, appeared beside her chair. His brown hair stuck out in an uneven cowlick, freckles scattered across his cheeks like tiny constellations. He stared at her wheelchair first, then at her face, his expression open and curious in a way adults never were. "My dad says you're really sad," he announced plainly, as if delivering a weather report. Emily blinked, caught off guard. "Does he now?" she replied, her voice flat, unsure whether to be amused or irritated. "Yeah," the boy continued without hesitation. "He says sometimes sad people just need a different kind of help. He can help you. He helped me when Mommy went to heaven." She opened her mouth, but found no words waiting there. He had spoken so simply, so matter-of-factly about something that must have been huge for him. She couldn't decide if his honesty was comforting or unsettling. The boy turned and pointed toward a greenhouse at the far end of the retreat's main path. Inside, a man in worn jeans and a navy blue t-shirt was bent over a bed of plants, his hands moving with a deliberate care that made the work seem almost meditative. His build was solid, his posture relaxed, his movements unhurried. When he looked up and spotted them, he didn't stare at the wheelchair or rush to offer assistance. Instead, he gave a small, genuine smile, not the pitying tilt of lips she'd grown used to, not the tight professional grin of therapists, but something warmer, almost grounding. Emily didn't smile back, but she found herself looking longer than she intended before turning away. That night, she couldn't sleep. The boy's words replayed in her mind. "He helped me." She didn't know who this man was or what exactly he had done for the boy, but the certainty in his voice lingered like a stone in her shoe, small, but impossible to ignore. Morning crept over the mountains in a slow spill of pale gold, mist still clinging stubbornly to the treetops. Emily sat in her chair outside the cabin, sketchbook balanced across her knees. Her pencil moved without much purpose, tracing half-formed shapes and lines that never quite became anything. She told herself it was just a way to pass the time, but the truth was she had always drawn when she didn't know what else to do with herself. She hadn't slept well. Every time she closed her eyes, the little boy's voice echoed back. "He helped me when Mommy went to heaven." The words carried a strange weight, not the kind that crushed, but the kind that refused to leave you alone. And every time she remembered them, she also saw the man in the greenhouse, moving among the plants as if the world beyond the glass didn't exist. The sound of footsteps on the gravel path broke her thoughts. They were slower and heavier than the boy's had been, measured, deliberate. She didn't look up right away, expecting it to be one of the staff checking in. But then a voice, calm and unhurried, reached her. "You don't have to smile," it said. "But maybe this will make today 1% better." She glanced up. It was the man from the greenhouse. Adam Miller, though she didn't know his name yet. He crouched slightly, so his eyes were level with hers, careful not to crowd her space. In his hand was a small, bright flower, its petals a sharp burst of color against the muted tones of the mountain morning. Emily stared at it for a moment, unsure what to say. No one had given her anything in weeks that wasn't a prescription, an exercise plan, or another hollow reassurance that things will get better. This was different. There was no pretense, no demand for a reaction. He simply extended the flower toward her, waited until she took it, and then straightened up without lingering. She finally spoke, her voice cautious. "You don't even know me." He gave a small shrug. "Don't need to. Sometimes it's enough just to make someone's day a little better, even if only by 1%. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving her with the unexpected weight of the flower in her lap. Later, she learned his story in pieces, mostly from overheard conversations and bits the staff let slip. Adam had once been a respected physical therapist at a large hospital in the city. His career had ended abruptly when his wife died without warning, leaving him alone with their young son. He left the city not long after, trading the relentless pace of hospital work for the quiet persistence of mountain life. He taught survival skills, grew herbs, and volunteered at healing storms when he could. But what the brochures didn't mention, what only the patients seemed to know, was that Adam had a way of reaching people before he ever touched a muscle or issued a single instruction. He didn't begin by treating an injury. He began by treating the person who carried it. Emily didn't know any of that for certain yet. All she knew was that a stranger had given her a flower without expecting anything in return, and that somehow, in a way she couldn't quite explain, it had made her morning feel different. Not lighter, exactly, but less hollow. For the first couple of weeks after the flower, Emily did everything she could to keep Adam Miller at arm's length. She wasn't rude, not exactly, but her silence spoke clearly enough. When he appeared, she would busy herself with something that didn't require talking, turning the pages of a book she wasn't reading, focusing on her sketches, or fiddling with her phone until he moved on. If he asked a question, she answered with the shortest possible words. If he made a comment, she let it hang in the air until it faded. It was a defense she'd learned quickly in the months after the accident. The quieter she was, the fewer chances people had to say something she didn't want to hear. But Adam didn't seem to take the hint. He didn't hover or push his way into her space. Instead, he had this quiet, steady presence, like a rock in a river, not blocking the current, just existing in it without being moved. Sometimes, he would sit a few yards away while his son, the freckled boy she'd met, played in the dirt or chased bugs through the grass. Adam would tend to the small garden near the cabins, checking the herbs, pulling weeds, and occasionally glancing over to see if she'd look his way. When their eyes met, he'd give that same calm smile, not a challenge, not an invitation, just an acknowledgement that she existed and he saw her. Her walls started to crack in small, unexpected ways. One afternoon, she made a dry, sarcastic remark about the blandness of the retreat's lunches, expecting it to slide past him like all her other comments. Instead, he chuckled, not politely, but genuinely, and said, "You haven't tried my cooking yet. I could make something that would make you forget you're eating carrots." She rolled her eyes, but the corner of her mouth betrayed her with the faintest twitch. The next time they crossed paths, he asked about her sketchbook. She didn't tell him what she was drawing, but she didn't close it either. He glanced down at the page, nodded once, and said, "You've got a good sense for light and shadow." No follow-up question, no request to see more. Just a simple observation before he turned back to his work. It was disarming. Everyone else who spoke to her seemed to want something. A smile, a sign of progress, a reason to believe their efforts weren't wasted. Adam seemed fine with whatever she was willing to give, even if it was nothing. One morning, as the mist was lifting from the valley, he sat across from her at the wooden picnic table outside the cabins. His son was nearby, trying to stack flat stones into a tower. Adam rested his forearms on the table, looked at her without urgency, and said in a voice so even it almost blended with the morning air, "I think your body's waiting on your heart, and your heart's waiting on permission to believe again." She met his gaze, her first instinct to deflect, to shut down the line of conversation before it went anywhere. But something in the way he said it, no pressure, no expectation, made her pause. She didn't reply, yet she didn't look away either. That silence between them wasn't the heavy, defensive kind she was used to. It was something else entirely, and it lingered with her long after he stood up to help his son rebuild the stone tower. It was late in the week when Adam finally suggested they try something beyond conversation. The idea didn't come with fanfare or a long speech, just a simple, almost casual offer as they sat in the shade of the greenhouse. "I want to try something with you," he said, leaning back on the bench. "It's not going to look like the therapy you're used to. No machines, no charts, no stopwatches. Just something different." Emily narrowed her eyes slightly. "Different how?" "Different enough," he replied, "that I can't really explain it without ruining it. You'll just have to trust me for an hour." Her instinct was to say no. Every other therapist she'd worked with had a set plan, a schedule that felt like being herded through a system. Adam's approach was unsettlingly open-ended. But there was something about the steadiness in his tone, the quiet certainty that didn't demand trust but earned it, that made her pause. Against her better judgment, she agreed. The next morning, when she arrived at one of the unused cabins, she froze at the doorway. Adam had transformed the small space completely. Full-length mirrors leaned against the walls, catching the light in fractured reflections. The floor was cleared, and the faint scent of polished wood hung in the air. A small speaker in the corner played soft strains of classical music, not the dramatic crescendos she remembered from the stage, but the gentle, deliberate notes of warm-up exercises. And somewhere in the room was a faint fragrance of rosin and lavender, smells that tugged at her memory like invisible threads. "It's not about making you dance," Adam said, watching her take it in. "It's about reminding your body of what it loved before it forgot." She wanted to tell him that her body hadn't forgotten. It had been taken from her, but the lump in her throat kept her silent. They started simply. Adam didn't push her into exercises right away. Instead, he guided her hands to rest lightly on the back of a sturdy chair, letting her feel its steadiness. "Just breathe," he instructed. "And listen." The music filled the space between his words, stirring memories she'd tried to bury. She remembered the feel of a bar beneath her palms, the anticipation before the first ply, the electric hum of her muscles when every movement felt like flight. It hurt, not just in her legs, but deep in her chest, to stand in that recreated echo of her old life. When they moved, it was painfully slow. A shift in weight here, a tiny bend in the knees there. Adam's hands were steady at her waist, not forcing, just supporting. "Let your body remember," he said softly. "Don't think about what you can't do. Think about the way it felt to move because you wanted to." Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Every adjustment sent a pulse of discomfort through her lower back and hips. But the strange thing was, she didn't feel like a patient. Not in this space. She wasn't counting repetitions or measuring progress. She was simply doing, and that felt different enough to matter. At one point, Adam stepped back, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "Let's try standing." Together. Her stomach tightened. She had tried before, many times, and the result had always been the same. Pain, shaking, the humiliating collapse back into her chair. But she nodded. His hands returned to her waist, firm and warm. The first second felt impossible. Her legs trembled so hard she thought they'd give out instantly. But they didn't. The second was worse. Her muscles burning, her breath shallow. And then, miraculously, the third second came, and she was still upright. She let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The tears came fast, unbidden, blurring the mirrored reflection in front of her. For the first time in 6 months, she wasn't crying because of pain or loss. She was crying because, for the briefest moment, she believed that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't finished yet. Charles Stanton had seen countless professionals walk through his daughter's life in the past 6 months. People with degrees, reputations, and invoices that made his financial team wince. None of them had given him what he truly wanted, a reason to believe she could get better. So when he began to notice subtle changes in Emily, the way she spoke a little more, the fact that she no longer stared at the ceiling for hours, his curiosity sharpened into suspicion. She still wasn't walking, but there was a spark in her eyes he hadn't seen since before the accident. He wanted to know why. One afternoon, after watching Adam and Emily finish another session in the mirror-filled cabin, Charles waited until Emily had left with one of the aides. Adam was wiping down a chair when Charles stepped inside. The air still smelled faintly of wood polish and lavender. "I've hired dozens of specialists," Charles began, his voice low and measured. "Doctors from New York to Zurich. Spent more than I care to admit. And yet here you are, a man from, where exactly? doing something none of them could. What? Adam straightened, meeting his gaze without a flicker of discomfort. Where I'm from doesn't matter. What matters is how you see her. Charles's brows drew together. And how do you think I see her? Like a problem you can't solve, Adam said plainly, but without accusation. Like a project. And I get it. That's how you've won at everything else in your life. But she's not broken, Mr. Stanton. She's a girl who forgot how strong she is. My job is to help her remember. Charles's first instinct was to bristle. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, least of all by someone who worked part-time at a mountain retreat. But there was no arrogance in Adam's voice, no hint of a challenge, just quiet certainty. And what happens? Charles asked after a pause. If she never walks again? Adam didn't hesitate. Then she'll still know she isn't facing it alone. That matters just as much as the walking. The simplicity of the answer unsettled Charles more than he expected. For years, he'd believed results were the only currency worth trading in. Here was a man who seemed to operate on something entirely different. For a long moment, Charles stood there, weighing his response. Finally, he gave a short nod. All right, I'll let you keep working with her. But understand this, she's my daughter. I don't care about your methods as long as she's safe. Adam's mouth curved into a faint smile. That's the only way I work. It wasn't exactly trust, not yet. But something had shifted. For the first time since the accident, Charles was willing to let someone else take the lead. The weeks that followed weren't a straight climb upward. Progress came in fits and starts. Some days Emily surprised herself, moving with more control than she thought possible. Other days her legs refused to cooperate at all, leaving her frustrated and exhausted. Adam never sugarcoated it. When a day went badly, he didn't tell her it was just a minor setback, or that she was due for a breakthrough. He simply reminded her that every effort mattered, even the ones that felt like failures. He was always there, not hovering, not pushing, but steady. Sometimes he worked beside her in silence, his son playing quietly nearby. Sometimes he filled the space with gentle conversation, pulling her mind away from the heaviness of her own body. But never once did he promise she would walk again. Instead, he promised something else entirely. You won't face this alone. By the time autumn settled over the mountains, the retreat's fields had turned golden, the tall grass catching the late afternoon light like strands of spun metal. The air was cool but gentle, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from the main lodge. It was on one of those golden evenings that Adam asked her, almost casually, "Want to try something outside today?" Emily hesitated. The cabin felt safe, contained. Out here, the uneven ground seemed like another obstacle waiting to trip her. But something about the openness of the field called to her, the way the mountains framed the horizon as if holding it in place. She nodded. Adam positioned himself at her side, one hand hovering near her waist, the other ready to steady her shoulder. His son stood a few yards away, watching intently, his small face bright with anticipation. Charles lingered just behind them, hands in his coat pockets, pretending to be calm but unable to take his eyes off his daughter. "Ready?" Adam asked softly. Emily took a slow breath, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. She pushed against the ground, her legs trembling instantly. The first step was more of a shuffle than a stride, but her foot moved forward and held. Adam's hand stayed close but didn't touch her. The second step came easier than the third. By the fourth, her legs were shaking so badly she thought she might fall, but she didn't. The fifth step felt like a lifetime in the making. She stopped, breathless, and realized the only sound in the world was the thudding of her own heart. Then she heard it, a small, bright laugh from Adam's son, carrying across the field like a bell. Adam smiled quietly, pride flickering in his eyes without a single word spoken. Behind them, Charles's composure broke. He pressed a hand over his mouth, but not before a sob escaped. Emily's own throat tightened, and the tears came before she could stop them. They weren't tears of grief this time. They were warm, startling, and alive. The kind of tears that come when you realize tomorrow might hold more than you dared hope. In that moment, with the mountains standing guard and the grass glowing gold around her, she believed. Not just in her body, but in herself.